Well, go ahead and start your PowerPointing. Tell us
Yeah, of course.
about chemical-free gardening.
All right. Let's see. Can you see that screen okay?
Yes, I do.
Perfect. Let's start this. All right, so for anyone who just started tuning in, my name's Michaela. I am a planning team member of the Door County Seed Library, and I'm here giving a presentation about chemical-free gardening. I want to give you a little bit about my background because I think that it'll sort of help explain where my perspective is coming from and some of the different contexts that I've worked in. So I grew up in Door County, but it wasn't until I moved to Maine that I really got interested in agriculture. While I was in Maine, I studied biology and environmental studies at college, particularly plant biology and ecology. But I also had the opportunity to work on a lot of small scale organic farms while I was in Maine, both affiliated with my college and some different community gardens and a different college, which was really lovely. And that's sort of the foundation of where I started my agricultural learning. I spent a semester in Costa Rica where I learned about tropical biology and ecology and some different types of agriculture that they have down in Costa Rica, which was very interesting. I spent a bit of time in New York City learning about indoor gardening, hydroponic and aeroponic methods, and so on. And then, as we were just talking about, I spent 6 months in Senegal with the Peace Corps before I was evacuated from my post due to coronavirus. So I'm back here in Door County. I'm apprenticing as a beekeeper. I'm working with the seed library, and I'm helping my mom with our victory garden. Just want to shout out her for being very patient with me trying a lot of different techniques and also just being an awesome beginner gardener. So, oops. There we go. So just to give you an outline of what we're going to be talking about today, I'm going to talk about what chemical-free gardening is, some different reasons why we might want to go chemical-free, and then some different methods for doing so, mostly focusing on cultivating healthy plants, making space for bugs in terms of pest prevention, and getting rid of pests in terms of pest control, and then we'll review what we've talked about. I've tried to make this presentation kind of a mix of theory and practice, a mix of beginner and like a little bit higher level agriculture. So I'm hoping there's something for everyone, but I'm hoping also to leave plenty of time for discussion at the end. And hopefully I'll be able to learn something too. So chemical-free gardening is a blanket term that's used to describe a variety of practices aimed at reducing or eliminating the use of synthetic chemicals, which most commonly refers to pesticides and fertilizers in one's garden. There are a few different reasons why we might want to go chemical-free. Kind of the most visceral one would be the harmful effects of pesticides. Pesticides do have some benefits, also have a lot of drawbacks. They're very detrimental to human health. We see 1 million deaths each year due to pesticide poisoning, and that's disproportionately affecting workers in developing nations who are growing, oftentimes growing food to transport to developed nations. And we see pesticide contamination during application, through toxic runoff into the environment, and ultimately through residue on produce, which the consumer oftentimes then consumes. There's a lot of detrimental effects when it comes to environmental health. There have been a lot of studies essentially showing that pesticides are present in every organism today, from bald eagles was a really one that was in the public eye a lot, to now insects. There's been a lot of studies out lately talking about the devastating effects of pesticides on insect populations, and to soil microorganisms, to dolphins, really anything, any organism, humans included, you can find some pesticide within that organism. Pesticides contaminate soil, surface, and groundwater, and they are a key factor in ecosystem collapse. So I want to focus on insects for a minute because they're, not a lot of people are necessarily huge fans of insects, but they are really important for sort of being the basis of a lot of food chains. That's at an ecosystem level, but they also really can benefit farming and gardening due to things like pollination. We'll also talk later about beneficial insects. So even you might think it's good to get rid of insects, but it's that's not always the case. Fertilizers also have lots of harmful effects, especially for aquatic ecosystems. Fertilizer runoff can cause algal blooms, oxygen depletion, and ammonia toxicity. All of those issues are really devastating for aquatic ecosystems, which is something that I think we care a lot about living in Door County and being surrounded by water on all sides. So I think it's something for us to be really mindful of. Fertilizers are also harmful to human health and livestock health when they leach into groundwater. Another specific to Door County, because our limestone is so porous, it's really easy for things to get into the groundwater here. So that's another thing that we need to be mindful of. And actually, counterintuitively, fertilizers can deplete soil quality and increase erosion. And that can lead to something called desertification or like salinization of the soil. And we'll get into that a little bit more too. The last thing is that fertilizers, both their production and their use, contribute to climate change. And I know that it's, most of these effects are effects that we're seeing on an industrial scale, but I do want to highlight that home gardeners these issues do still exist for us. They're not exempt, we're not exempt from these problems. We have our local ecosystems. Fertilizers can run off into small waterways just as much as large waterways. Something that I learned, which was actually really stuck with me, is about 1/3 of poisoning cases involve children younger than 6. So I think that that's, for those who have kids and grandkids, I think it's really important to be mindful of what we have in our garden sheds, what we're putting onto our plants, and ultimately what we're putting into our bodies. So another reason why we might want to go chemical free is that plants have their own defense responses. And this is something that I'll touch on a few different times throughout this presentation. But I think to me, it's one of the most fascinating parts of plants, and a very relevant and interesting reason why we'd want to go chemical free. As you can see here, this plant has thorns, which is one defense response, not necessarily the most relevant in our gardens. Might be if you're growing roses or something, but plants they've been around a lot longer than we have. They've been around a lot longer than we've been growing them. And I just want to highlight a few different defense responses that plants have. So they can defend themselves in physical ways, like these thorns, or I don't know if you've heard of trichomes, but they're essentially little hairs that are on leaves and basically just make it sort of pokey and sticky and crunchy for any animal that's trying to eat them, sort of unpleasant. Plants, they also have different compounds that they can use to deter or poison pests. Something incredible about plants is that they can actually signal when they get eaten by a pest. They release a compound, it's called a volatile organic compound. And it goes through the air, and it's a signal that draws in predatory insects, which for those insects, they're getting the signal, there's a meal here on this plant. And so the predatory insect will come and eat the pest that the plant signaled it was having an issue with. It's very cool. And then another really interesting one is that plants can actually release, when a pest is feeding on them, they can release enzymes into the digestive system of that pest that basically makes it so that the pest can't digest the food, and the pest can sometimes starve to death because of that. So it's a really, they really have it figured out. So I think for me, when I think about chemical-free gardening, a lot of it is letting plants do what they do best, giving them an environment to do that in. And that's sort of where thinking of your garden as an ecosystem comes into mind. This is something else that I'll be touching on a lot. There's a few different components to this. Staying focused on what's important is it's part of thinking of your garden as an ecosystem. If I'm out there in my garden and I see my cabbage, has a little nibble on it, that's okay with me. It's okay for me to feed some of the critters that are around in my neighborhood. Do I want my entire cabbage crop to be eaten? no. And that's, that's where I start to manage pest problems. But I think it's thinking of your garden as an ecosystem is thinking about it and saying, I don't really need that one cabbage leaf. This isn't worth kind of blasting my plants with chemicals in this case. It's also important to take care of your community. So I think pollinators are a really good example of this because they're really useful to our gardens, but they also are really useful to the ecosystems around our gardens. They sort of transcend just the sphere of our garden. They're more broad than that. And so I think, we might plant flowers to attract pollinators to our gardens, but those pollinators, that act of planting flowers is also going to benefit the entire community. And if you have a healthy ecosystem surrounding your garden, that's going to feed back into your garden, whether that's through pollinators, through beneficial insects, or, there's various other ways that can happen. Another aspect of thinking of your garden as an ecosystem is mimicking nature. There are so much of gardening today is actually starting to replicate what we see in the natural world because, like I said, plants have been doing this much longer than we have, and really they know best. So we want to kind of create an environment in which they can thrive, and a lot of times that means using sort of principles that we already see in nature to do that. So one example is using a tall, large plant to shade a smaller plant, or, some plants have roots that can really dig deep into the soil and break up that soil, and then you can plant something with shallower roots on top of that that can make use of that sort of shallow soil breaking up effect. So there's things like that that we see in the natural environment that we can bring into our gardens, and it'll benefit our gardens. And then, like I said already, plants will take care of themselves. It's we sort of just need to provide an environment in which they can do so. So let's get started. Something that I'd like to note before we get into any techniques is that a lot of these techniques were originated with Black and Indigenous agricultural practices, and a lot of times those techniques have been misappropriated and put under labels like permaculture or regenerative agriculture or other things that we're seeing come up more and more as, I don't want to say fads quite, but the next big thing in gardening is often something that was developed by Black and Indigenous farmers. So I think it's important for us to acknowledge that and give credit where credit is due. There's common practices like soil testing, soil remediation, companion planting, nursery systems, vermicomposting, crop rotation. These are really common practices that we see today in our agriculture that have their origins someplace that's not being completely acknowledged. So I think it's important for us to recognize that, as we learn and grow as a gardening community. So we're going to be focusing today on 3 sort of overarching methods for chemical-free gardening. The first is cultivating healthy plants. The second is making space for bugs. And the third is getting rid of bugs. So cultivating healthy plants, like I said, plants take care of themselves. They do a really good job at it. Part of one thing that you can do, before anything else is think about, each plant has a microclimate that they prefer. Should the soil be moist? Should it be clayey? Should it be sandy? Should there be a lot of sun? Should there be shade? And planting your plants within those parameters, knowing what they like and what they thrive in, you're already going to be giving them a really good start to make sure that they have what they need to grow. But the first biggest foundation of having a healthy plant is the soil. Soil is the literal foundation of everything that happens in your garden. It's very important. To have good soil structure, to have good soil nutrient composition. So we're going to be looking at some different techniques that can enhance your soil. And something that I just want to mention about soil is that it's a process. It's a slow process, but it's really worth it if you can invest the time and the energy into building your soil and cultivating your soil. it's really going to benefit your plants in the long term. And every year is an opportunity to add more nutrients to get better soil structure. And it's not as fast as Miracle-Gro, but ultimately it's going to serve your garden better. So one of sort of the key principles of good soil health is to keep disturbance minimal. The kind of two main aspects of this are compaction and erosion, and this can happen in a variety of ways. But if your soil is compacted or if it's eroded, you're going to be not having a good structure for your plant's roots to be able to go into, and you're going to be losing a lot of nutrients every year. So one of the main techniques that can reduce mostly soil erosion is cover cropping. You can see this at a field crop scale all throughout Door County, but you can also implement it in a smaller garden. And cover crops, what they do is they essentially protect your soil by, you plant them at the end of the summer and the fall to sort of like overwinter. And their roots sort of just like hang on to the soil, and it protects it against a lot of heavy rain and the snow and the melting and the wind and everything that happens in between when you stop gardening in the fall and when you start in the spring. A lot of cover crops also are nitrogen fixers, which means that they're going to be not only protecting your soil from erosion, but they're also going to be putting nutrients into the soil that your plants can then use later in the season. Another of the kind of overarching practices of soil conservation is reduced tillage or no tillage systems. This can be hard to kind of switch to right away, but it is definitely a worthy goal. And essentially when you're tilling your soil, you actually counterintuitively, again, kind of end up compacting it over time. And you're also losing a lot of nutrients when you kind of dig them up like that, and it's easy for them to blow off essentially. One alternative to tillage actually is the tarping method. I was working on this a little bit in Maine. And essentially you take ideally a black tarp, but really anything that's not clear, and it's a way of preparing your bed. So you spread it over your garden bed, and what it does is weeds will germinate, but they won't have any sunlight because of the black tarp, so they'll die. So you're basically clearing, you're getting all the weeds to germinate, and you're clearing that weed seed from your garden bed. And then another great thing that tarping does is it also breaks down if you left any crop residue in your garden bed from, over winter or after you harvested it. It'll break down that crop residue and into this actually really nice kind of like powdery substance, and that's nutrients that are going right back into your soil. So that's another really great aspect of tarping. So
you do that at the end of the season? Is that what you're saying?
So you can do it. It's actually a great technique because you can really use it. You could put a tarp on your beds at the end of the season. You can put it on a couple of weeks before you want to start planting in your bed, or you can do it in between crop rotations. And essentially if you have a bed of lettuce that you harvest and you leave some lettuce residue in there and you want to clear out the bed before you plant again, you put the tarp over it, you wait a week, 2 weeks, kind of depends on the temperature and the sunlight, and then you pull it off and you just have this like beautiful soil just ready to go. There's no weeds in there. So yeah.
We also have a question from Facebook.
Sure.
Are cover crops necessary or useful in raised beds?
They can be useful in raised beds. I think that in raised beds, tarping might be a good alternative. If it's easier for you to just throw a tarp over it, that's great. I think cover crops can be really useful in raised beds for the nitrogen fixing benefits, putting nutrition into your soil, especially with raised beds. It's a sort of like closed system for the most part. So you're not going to be getting a lot of nutrients unless you put them directly in. So I think cover crops can be useful in raised beds.
Thank you.
Yeah. So hopefully that covers it with tarping. Maybe I should have put an illustration, and I think it's a little bit of I think you need to see it. It's a little hard to explain just verbally, but yeah, feel free to message me or ask any more questions about that. I'm gonna move on to double digging, which is definitely a soil disturbance. I don't know if everyone's familiar with double digging, but you essentially take off your topsoil out of your bed, and then the next layer, I was taught 10 to 15 centimeters beyond that. Again, how much soil we actually have in Door County is kind of variable. So, you know, if you can take off some topsoil and still have more after that, you can kind of mix up the stuff, your bottom layer, and put soil amendments into that, and then put the topsoil back into the bed and amend that as well. So essentially double digging is a way of combating soil compaction and also giving you an opportunity to amend your beds. Double digging is a technique that I would recommend the first year you break ground somewhere in particular. I wouldn't recommend doing it every year, but if you notice, you know, your soil's starting to get compacted again after a few years, I think it's, you know, double digging is fine. It's not, I wouldn't say it's a form of tilling, but it is a soil disturbance, but using it sporadically can actually benefit your soil structure and your soil nutrient composition. And lastly, I just feel the need to highlight reducing compaction in your garden beds. I feel the #1 gardening mistake that I've done, that I've seen lots of other people do, is to step in your beds. And that's just an instant way to impact your soil and basically undermine everything else you've been doing to build your soil and amend your soil. So the way you can avoid that is by planting your garden so that you're able to effectively reach, you know, with your hands all of the different things, you know, plants and stuff that you need to reach, rather than having to like step or walk into your bed in order to access your plants. Sorry, I can't hear your audio.
Sorry. We have another question from Facebook. What would you recommend for nitrogen fixation?
Yeah, so the best thing for nitrogen fixers are legumes. So a lot of clovers do a really good job with that. That's a really common cover crop. You can also, I mean, people do it with alfalfa, buckwheat. Those are kind of the most common ones that I've heard of. But I think, you know, clover is a really good option because that usually fixes nitrogen. And you can just, if you're looking at purchasing a cover crop, it'll have information about whether it's a nitrogen fixer there. But yeah, legume is kind of the word to look out for. Yeah. So, sorry, did you have was there another question?
No, that's all we have right now.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. So this is sort of, all of these techniques are meant to, like I said, reduce compaction and reduce erosion. And they're sort of soil structure building techniques. What the other side of sort of building soil is building the nutrient within the soil. And this is one of my favorite parts of gardening, because I think it really shows us like that we can look around us and find solutions there. So there's a lot of natural fertilizers and amendments that you can use that are probably at your house for no cost at all. In my garden this year, I used eggshells, I used coffee grounds, I used charcoal and wood ash, which you can just grab from your fire pit as long as you haven't been burning plastic or anything else toxic in there. You can use dead leaves, you can crush those up and mix them into the soil. You can also use that as a mulch, which I'll get into in a minute. Compost tea is a really fun one. I love compost tea. You essentially take compost, or you can do it with manure. I've even heard of people doing it with food scraps. You put it in a mesh bag, and you put that mesh bag into some sort of tub or bucket. I would recommend like a trash can. I think that's usually a good size, like one of those bigger trash cans. And you just let it sit there for a few weeks. And if you want to, you know, really do some extra muscle work and really make the most out of it, you can aerate it. So, you know, I don't know, certain aquarium parts can probably help you aerate it, or you can just like pull the bag out every once in a while and stir the tea with the little stick, or, you know, just get some air in there. And eventually, after a few weeks, you're going to have this dark liquid that looks like coffee or looks like tea. And what you've done is essentially you've soaked all of the nutrients out of that compost or out of that manure, out of those food scraps, and you can now just water, that into your garden. You do have to dilute that solution, otherwise you're going to burn your plants probably. But it's a really, really great resource. It's pretty easy to do. You just have to kind of grab a few materials and kind of get it together and then sit with it for a little while. But compost tea is super fun. I love compost tea. And then another fun one that I learned in Senegal actually is rice water and pasta water. You can use the water that some people rinse rice, some people don't rinse rice. But if you rinse rice, you can use that water and just water your garden with it. And then you can also use the water that that you drain out of pasta that you've boiled. You can't have salt in it. That's the important thing. I usually put salt in my pasta water. But, these are really all just ways of thinking about, like, where are there nutrients that are in my life that I can put into my garden? I'm not going to make use of the nutrients in banana peels, but my plants can, so it's about sort of being creative, and there can be flexibility with how you apply these things, whether all of these you can put into compost and then put in your garden. A lot of these you can just put directly into your garden. So it's sort of just thinking about like where those nutrients are, where you can get them and where they can benefit your garden. And something just to mention as well is that, like I said, this isn't going to be as fast as Miracle-Gro, but this is going to be really good for your plants and for all of the soil microorganisms that help your plants. So I really recommend trying some of these techniques, and it can be, for me, it's really fun, thinking about like where are these nutrients that I'm throwing out. I wouldn't have thought about pasta water, but there's one to give a go anyway. So another component of building soil and protecting soil actually is mulching and composting. Mulching is the practice of putting some sort of material around your plant, kind of covering the soil surface in your garden. And mulch, you can mulch with compost, you can mulch with wood chips, you can mulch with straw or leaves. There's a lot of different materials that you can mulch with. And what mulching does is it protects the soil from erosion and compaction. And it does that, the soil can't blow away, because of the wind, because there's the mulch on top. And the soil also isn't going to get compacted from you watering on it. For instance, this season I had the wrong watering can and it was compacting my soil. And, eventually I got a new watering can. But before that, I put some mulch down just because it's the surface that is getting hit before your soil is getting hit and before your soil is getting compacted. So it can be really great for those two uses. Mulching, most things that you mulch with also add nutrients to your soil. And then something really cool about mulching is it regulates moisture retention. So if you've had a ton of rain, mulch can work to sort of insulate your plant from that. And it essentially acts as like insulation and sometimes kind of wicking. And so your plant might not necessarily get absolutely flooded. If you've had not any rain, it can also help to sort of hold on to soil and to moisture and put that moisture into the soil for your plants to use. So that's it's really cool how it works actually on both ends of things. I'm sorry, I'm not getting your sound again.
I have to figure how to work this smoothly. We have another Facebook comment. Mm-hmm. Do you have a recommendation on what to use to make soil more acidic? For even though I keep adding organic acid feeders, soil is still pH 7 and 6 or a little less is recommended. Plants are struggling. My guess is limestone here. Do you have any comments on that?
They want the soil to be more acidic?
Yeah, for blueberries apparently.
Oh, for blueberries. Oh, yeah. I think blueberries will be a challenge here for sure, given how alkaline our soil tends to be.
Coffee grounds and pine needles. But
Yeah.
anything more she can do?
Those would be the ones I would think of to try as well. But I'm going to note that down. And nothing's coming to the top of my head right now for acidity, but I'll look it up and I'll get back to that commenter just to see if there's anything, anything else that comes up. But sorry, I can't answer that one more directly right now.
You could put something on the library Facebook or the Seed Library Facebook page, maybe.
Yeah, that'd be good. I'll look into that one and I'll get back to the commenter.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we're going to move into weeding. This is, we all know what weeding is, so not too much explanation required here. But weeding is sort of just part of making sure that you're giving your young plants a fighting chance. You know, as you can see in the picture here, this weed has far outgrown it looks like peas that this person planted. And, weeds are amazing at what they do. I think they're really incredible plants. We don't necessarily want them to take over our garden. So I try to always weed proactively, just a little bit every time I go into the garden. And, if you notice things getting out of control, maybe you need to devote a lot of time to it. But I think that just doing a little bit at a time and just staying on top of it can be really helpful. And it gives your plants, like I said, it gives your young plants a chance to really establish themselves and, have a competitive edge over, weeds, which are going to be enjoying the benefits of all those nutrients that you put into the soil too. Also, I want to note that mulching can help with weeds as well. So that's another good reason to use mulching. And lastly, in terms of creating a really good growing environment for our plants, crop rotation is a very common technique. It's one that you see a lot in field crops. Up here you'll see farmers will plant soybeans and then they'll plant, wheat, and then they'll plant corn, and then they'll plant alfalfa or whatever. And it's a lot of the reason that you do that is actually if you have nitrogen fixers, like I believe alfalfa is a nitrogen fixer, soybeans definitely a nitrogen fixer. Those are going to be putting those nutrients into your soil, which then your corn can take up. And we can use that on a smaller scale in our garden as well. The location where I put my beans and my peas this year might be where I want to put, my tomatoes or something that wants a lot of nutrients next year. Another reason for crop rotation is for pest control, actually, pest prevention. So an example is potatoes. If I plant a bed of potatoes and some pest finds these potatoes and just really feasts on them, I want to make sure that they're not able to find these potatoes as easily next year. So I might move the potatoes to a different bed. And the degree to which that works on a small scale level is I'm a little skeptical of to some extent, but it kind of depends on the pest because, for instance, some pests overwinter in the soil. So if you move their host plant to a different location, they're not going to be able to emerge and immediately start feeding on that host plant. So it does work in situations like that, but it's just a really good management practice in general. So we're going to move on to step 2, which is making space for bugs. This is about using insects, like beneficial insects or pollinators that can really benefit your garden, and how to make your garden a good space for those bugs. Beneficial insects, I love beneficial insects. They're amazing. I talked about them a little bit already. They will kill or sometimes parasitize pests that are plaguing plants. They're part of a plant's natural defense system, so plants can sort of summon them. I'm injecting this reminder that your garden is an ecosystem, because if you have a pest problem, spray insecticide all over the place, you're going to be killing some of your beneficial insects as well as whatever target pest is. So those beneficial insects won't be available to come help you out when you're having, aphid problems or, hornworm problems or this or that. Some of the most common examples of beneficial insects are ladybugs, lacewings, ground beetles, praying mantis, and parasitic wasps. You see beneficial insects used a lot in indoor gardening because they don't have the option of sort of naturally luring in beneficial insects to their garden. So a lot of times indoor gardens will order beneficial insects online, which you can do as well if you like. I think in high school, I ordered 1,000 ladybugs from Amazon for $6 or something like that actually as a prank, but it can help your garden as well. But, so you can ship them in. You can also lure them in, which I think is generally a more healthy practice, and we'll get into that in a minute. Pollinators are essential. There's lots of conversation about pollinators these days, which is great. I love pollinators. And they are really essential for all plants in general, really. 3/4 of the world's flowering plants and about 35% of the world's food crops depend on animal pollinators. And some of those food crops are probably present in your garden, some aren't. But this is, again, another instance where we can kind of be generous with the ecosystem. We can support pollinators that, maybe only half of my crops are going to be pollinated by, a bee or a moth or a fly or whatever. There's all sorts of pollinators. It's great. So maybe only half of my crop needs a pollinator. But, if I really want to support them in the environment as well, it's a great opportunity to plant some flowers. Just an all-around excellent part of gardening. Flowers they can attract beneficial insects, they can attract pollinators, they really benefit your garden. Some flowers can repel other pests, and it's also an opportunity to, bring a little joy to your garden, do something just for fun. So I think when you're planting, I personally believe that it's important for every garden to have a section or space devoted to flowers. For me, part of that is personal joy, but it's also, like I said, really beneficial for your garden and for the ecosystem in general. So it's good because there's so many reasons why you want to plant flowers. I encourage you to sort of look into how different flowers can benefit different aspects of the goals that you want to accomplish. You might want to plant some native flowers for native pollinators. You might want to plant some flower just because you like it. You might want to plant one because you know that it draws that specific beneficial insect to your garden that's going to help you with that specific pest that you always have a problem with. So it's a really good opportunity to mix and match. And I just wanted to throw out some examples of flowers that can really benefit your garden, and there's lots and lots, but I just pulled a few. Dill, Queen Anne's lace, cosmos, tansy, sunflower. Marigold is a huge one. Nasturtium is another huge one. Hairy vetch, sweet clover, yellow rocket, and verbena. Really, I just recommend finding what works for you. I really don't like the smell of marigolds, actually, so I don't plant marigolds, but I plant other flowers that have sort of a similar suite of effects, essentially. So that's flowers. Very exciting. And sorry, Laura, did you have a...
No, I was going to say, I just noted, I walk by the library garden every day on my way to work, and I saw the columbine were dropping their seeds, so I went and saved as many as I could.
That's awesome.
So we'll be distributing those through the seed library.
That's great. That's very exciting. Wild columbine is one of my favorite flowers of all time. They're so gorgeous, so lovely. So we're on to step 3. So removing bugs. Maybe your preventative measures didn't go quite as well as you had hoped, but that's okay. We're gonna start. There are so many different techniques for pest control, and it really depends on what pests you have. So I'm not an expert on, I'm not at the level where I can just look at a plant, know exactly what pest is, the problem, and know exactly what the solution is. I I still Google things. I still, look at different solutions, but I'm going to share a few solutions that are just sort of to get us thinking about different approaches, I guess. So the first one is a mechanical method of pest control, which is just hand removal. I feel like this is sort of the bug equivalent of weeding, and hand removal is really important. It allows you to kind of check in with your garden. It can be a form of monitoring as well. And hand removal can actually work to control your insect populations. It kind of depends on you, on how much you want to, go all in on hand removal. I would say a lot of people hand remove worms and eggs, which are usually on the bottom of their leaves. Those are really easy ones. Do I want to spend the whole day trying to find every single aphid in my garden and hand removing it? I personally don't. If you want to, that's fine. But I think it's a really good tool for kind of assessing your garden and, does affect your pest population and does give you the opportunity to look into other treatment methods as well. One really common treatment method, I know this is a presentation on chemical-free gardening, but neem oil is a really commonly used botanical oil, and it's derived from the neem tree, which is a very, very beautiful tree. I recommend looking up a full picture of it, which maybe I should have included. But neem oil works, it's a really common solution. Neem oil works essentially by smothering young insects on a plant and essentially suffocating them by being all over their body. And it can also prevent the spread of fungus. It won't cure fungus, and it doesn't work very well on older insects. So it's important. Neem is a really useful tool. It's also really important to make sure that you're using it properly. Too much use can be detrimental to your plants, and it's not going to be effective against every single insect. It's not going to be effective if you're trying to just use it as a cure-all, which I'm definitely guilty of doing. I've done that before, but just make sure that you're using it in the for the specific uses that it's designed for, which, as I just described, is pretty much just like suffocating young insects or controlling the spread of fungus. Neem oil's a fun one. Cutworm collars are another mechanical method of control, and I don't know if everyone or anyone has dealt with cutworms before. They are my least favorite garden pest. I think just because they're so emotionally devastating. One day you have this beautiful, healthy seedling, and then the next morning you come out, and what cutworms do is they just cut the stem, essentially, of the plant. And so, your beautiful seedling's lying on the ground, you can't save it. So you have to be really preventative when it comes to cutworms. And what a lot of people do is they use cutworm collars, which some people use toilet paper tubes. I've seen solo cups, water bottles, coffee cups, really kind of just any cylinder that you can bury a little ways into the ground, but also, as you see, above the soil here as well. And that'll just kind of prevent cutworms from being able to just go and just cut the stem. It's really a bummer. I don't know what they get out of that, but it can be very devastating as a gardener to see all your beautiful seedlings on the ground. But so that's one instance of a mechanical method of pest control. Another mechanical method is sticky traps, which are very fun. Sticky traps are often used as a monitoring tool, actually, because it's obviously pretty tough to kind of just sit in your garden and just watch all these bugs zipping around, and it's hard to ID pests in a format if they're not landing on your plants, or just for various reasons. So sticky traps, the bugs will stick to the trap, and you can sort of look at it and identify, okay, I have one of this pest and I have 50 of this pest on the sticky trap. So maybe I need to start doing some preventative measures or treatment measures for the pests. But they can also work as a control method if for certain pests, obviously these are all for flying insects. They can actually capture enough of the pest to make like a meaningful difference in the control of that pest. So, but you'll want to look into more which, like, specifically that is. So there's lots of other methods. The ones I presented so far are ones that I could, easily find are research validated. Some of these on this list here are research validated as well, but there's lots of folk knowledge and, conventional, unconventional knowledge about pest control. And, I would recommend if you have a pest problem to work on diagnosing it and then start looking into treatment from there. I do actually want to highlight the first two that I put on here, row cover and diatomaceous earth. These are really cool. Row cover is a little bit more of an investment in effort and money. And essentially it's this piece of light fabric that you'll put over your garden bed like a blanket. And it excludes things that would fly in there. Like I've especially seen them used against cabbage moths, which are a big one. And that works pretty well. And often the sheet is usually like a white semi-transparent, so plenty of sunlight can get in there to your crops, and that's fine. But like I said, a little bit more of an investment in terms of time and money. Diatomaceous earth is another really cool one. Essentially, it is it's derived from diatoms, which are naturally occurring, and they're made out of, I believe it's silica, which is glass. And basically, these organisms are crushed up and put into this like powder, and you scatter this powder into your garden. And it's not sharp for you or anything; it's no problem. But it's a really fine, like, glass compound essentially that will tear up the underbelly of different worms that are crawling their way into your garden. So it's a really good way of kind of physically excluding pests. Those little worms that are not earthworms, but cutworms, hornworms, all that. They're making their way into your garden. So, but lots of other options as well. And unfortunately, not enough time to get into all of them. But yeah, just an encouragement that you can get creative. Don't be afraid to experiment. There's lots of, the great part about gardening is you can always try again next year if something goes awry. And there's lots of ideas out there about gardening that you can really start to implement in your home garden that can help you go chemical free. And it can be, going chemical free can be a process. You don't have to say, starting tomorrow, I'm never using another synthetic chemical in my garden. You can do that, and that's great. And there's lots of options that can support you doing that. But you can say, I'm going to stop using fertilizers, and I'm going to start, doing these natural fertilizers instead. Things like that. It's a very flexible, fluid process that it's exciting to engage in. So I want to highlight two different rabbit holes that I haven't really gone down too much, but are really actually deeply woven into this presentation, and they're key parts of chemical-free gardening in general. Integrated pest management is, it provides biological, cultural, mechanical, and ultimately chemical methods of pest prevention and control. Many of these methods we've covered today, but it really, as you can see by the diagram there, it's like really a whole system of thinking and planning and preventing and monitoring and everything. So I recommend digging into that if you'd like. The other rabbit hole is companion planting, which I haven't gone into here because I'm actually giving another presentation on August 21st all about companion planting. But the foundation of companion planting is planting two plants in close proximity to each other that can have a relationship with each other that benefits each of them. So a lot of times that's oriented towards pest control, but oftentimes there's lots of other beneficial effects, like providing shade, or I mentioned like getting different root structures that help support and augment each other's growth. So I'll be going into that a lot more later. So I just want to review kind of the overarching concepts and themes of what we've talked about today. Chemical-free gardening reduces harm to humans and the environment from synthetic pesticides and fertilizers. And these practices allow plants to best support themselves as they're capable of doing. Viewing our gardens as ecosystems can allow us to decide what's important and to be generous in how we manage our gardens. And chemical-free gardening requires prevention and control techniques, soil building, and a willingness to be creative and find new things. I used a lot of images, which this is all the credit for that. And then used a lot of information sources as well. I'll pause on the screen for a minute in case anyone wants to screenshot it, but you know, for their own reference. But I want to take this opportunity to say as well that, you know, I don't know if I'll be able to answer every question that you have today, but I'm always happy to do research. I love doing research on this stuff. So if anyone has questions that, you know, maybe I can't answer now or I can't answer as in depth as I'd like to, please reach out to me, and I'd really love to, you know, have a conversation and, you know, find some research, find some information for you. So,
and as I said, we could use the Door County Seed Library Facebook page. So if anyone has questions, they could send them in there, and we can have you answer there.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. I would love to hear if you have any questions, or I'm sure we have much more seasoned gardeners attending than myself. So I'd love to hear about what chemical-free methods you use in your gardens. But I'm going to turn off screen sharing for now, if that's okay, so I can focus back into this chat here.
So does anyone have any questions? I see most people are muted at this point. And what are you planting in your garden this year, Michaela?
Let's see, we have some zucchini and some radishes, tomatoes, basil, peas, beans, cucumbers,
It looks like she may have frozen, or I've frozen. Well, it looks like Michaela's having some trouble. She'll probably be back. Does anyone have any questions? You can type in chat if you'd like, or send questions into the Door County Seed Library Facebook page, and we'll have her answer. She's on the planning team now, so it's easy to get a hold of her. And if she doesn't come back, I'd like to thank her for being here, and thank everyone else for coming.